Today's discussion will be presented in 3 sections since we are recording it for broadcast on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. You're welcome to post questions and comments during the session, and we'll try to answer them online. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Jason Miller, Executive Editor of Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.
Welcome to the discussion today. My guests are Thomas Beach, the Senior Advisor for the Office of the Undersecretary of Commerce for Intellectual Property at the Patent and Trademark Office, Kelly Chewbacca, the Chief Data Officer at the U.S. Postal Service's Office of the Inspector General, Audrey Kaluri, the Chief of the Decennial Information Technology Division at the U.S. Census Bureau, Naveen Vembar, the Chief Technology Officer at the General Services Administration, and John Bakke, the Executive Vice President of Customer Operations at MarkLogic. Welcome, panelists, to the discussion today. Before we get started, let me set some context for our discussion. The idea of breaking down federal data silos isn't new. As far back as 2007, if not probably way before, when we kind of realized this idea of it's all about the data. IT is all about the data. It became commonplace for federal agencies, industry partners to talk about the need to merge, integrate, better align data to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of the federal government. For years, however, this concept of data alignment, data integration wasn't easy. There was not a great way to pull data together without relying on manual efforts to obtain what many call the 360-degree view of that information. Over the last 3 to 5 years, this concept has been able to gain some better traction with the development and the acceptance of cloud computing and, of course, better big data tools. One of the driving forces behind this effort is the Digital Accountability and Transparency Act, or the DATA Act. Let me offer a few examples. The Small Business Administration, just as one example, are doing something called the Grants Data Explorer. This is a visualization tool that keeps track of the grants the agency is making, where they're going, how much the grant money the recipient has used. The agency is developing what they call 4 flat files and adding information on appropriations, object classes, activities, and awards. And that 4th file links all the awards and financial data together. Another example, the Consumer Product Safety Commission. Their issue isn't how much data, but both the velocity and the variety of the data it collects. CPSC is using the cloud to develop a data lake to deal with this information management and governance challenges. These are just 2 examples of hundreds across the government of agencies trying to figure out how best to address not just the velocity and variety, but of course also the volume of data. Now, to reach this ideal world of seamless integration, there are several challenges, including the cost to maintain the information and to bring it all together in one place, or so it runs across a common set of tools. Another ongoing challenge is the data trends tends to be static. How do agencies use tools to understand this data, make changes, add or take away intelligence of historical data, and then also give it to the agency decision makers? Now, all this comes back to the 3 areas we're going to discuss today, and really agencies should be focusing on data integration, data agility, and of course, enterprise data management. So with that context in place, once again, our guests, Thomas Beach, the Senior Advisor in the Office of the Undersecretary of Commerce for Intellectual Property at the Patent and Trademark Office, Kelly Chewbacca, the Chief Data Officer at the U.S. Postal Service in the Office of Inspector General, Audrey Kaluri, the Chief of the Decennial Information Technology Division at the U.S. Census Bureau, Naveen Vembar, the Chief Technology Officer for the General Services Administration, and John Bakke, the Executive Vice President of Customer Operations at MarkLogic. So let me turn to Naveen to get us started for today, since you just happen to be on my left. This idea of data, the pulling data, integration data, GSA has a ton of data, all the acquisition data. How are you guys going down that path?
So I think there's a couple ways that we're doing that. The primary way, under our Chief Data Officer, Chris Rowley, is this product called Data to Decisions. And within Data to Decisions, we're actually working across our entire agency to pull together disparate data sets incrementally over time as I identify them as priority data sets to merge together. And the really key thing here is that we're not actually focused heavily or purely on the technology. We're actually very flexible about the individual technologies that are being used. What we're much more interested in is the governance around this. And I think that is actually extremely key. What we've done is created a structure that goes all the way up to our executive level to actually make decisions about how we're going to use our data, what data we need, and what data gets prioritized to move into this environment. Additionally, we have all this acquisition data, like you said, right? We have all this acquisition data that's in the integrated award environment systems that they're actually merging across different components of the award lifecycle, right? So everything from you registering to do business with the federal government to actually getting awards and tracking the use of those contracts over time is actually being built out in a unified manner over there in compliance with the Data Act. We're working very closely with Treasury on setting those standards and working with them to implement. But again, key thing there is, again, not the technology. It is very much the governance, and I think that's been our focus.
Now I could spend the whole period here talking about IAE, but we won't because there's many other panelists. Let me turn to Autry from the Census Bureau. Data is your life. Yes. Everything is about data. Talk a little bit about how you're dealing with this initial integration and merging of data.
Thank you, Jason. Wonderful to be here. As you all know, Census Bureau is basically the agency that measures America, its people, its places, and its economy. And how do we do that? We basically conduct surveys and censuses. And so we produce a lot of data, probably the largest producers of data in the world, the entire world. So what do we do to integrate all of this data? So we have started 2 enterprise programs. One is called CETCAP, Census Enterprise Data Collection and Processing. And the other is called CETSI, which is the Center for Enterprise Data Dissemination and Consumer Innovation. So the objective here is to first standardize the data model, because no matter what survey it is, no matter what census it is that we conduct, the objective is to have a canonical data model that allows us to collect the data, majority of the data that fits into that canonical model. And then, of course, there are some additional aspects of the data that each survey or census may have, which we are now associating with metadata. And we are basically registering that metadata into a metadata repository that allows us to understand the data and integrate it well. Now, CETSI is for data dissemination, and the objective there is to take all of the data that we collect, standardize it, synthesize it, and make it available for our consumers. We recently have created a beta version of a new product. For those that are interested to find out, please go to data.census.gov, and you'll see the new version of what we call as the CETSI platform that allows us to analyze the data in association with all of the surveys and censuses we conduct.
Now I know that it's great that there's this new beta version. You have the big 2020 count coming up. So real quickly, is this part of that build up toward 2020, or is this something because you do the American Community Surveys and you do some data is never ending at the Census Bureau?
That's correct. So CETCAP is the program that's actually building applications, and you probably heard about the decisions that we made recently to use a platform that enables us to produce applications from that platform. The objective is to collect the data using the applications that come out of the platform, and all of those applications will be used in 2020. And later on, as we tabulate the data and we make it ready for dissemination, that's when, yes, the CETSI program comes in, and the platform that we're building is going to be used to deliver the data.
Very good. Let's turn to Kelly now. You guys at the Office of the Inspector General at the Postal Service is using data a little differently than the first 2 panelists. Talk a little bit about how you guys are integrating and pulling data.
Thanks, Jason. So to give some context, we're an independent agency within the Postal Service that's responsible for overseeing the operations of a $65 billion entity that binds America together. On top of that, we oversee 650,000 employees and contractors, so we're looking to monitor the integrity of those people in their operations. We also have substantial data sets that we produce internally. For example, all the zip code information comes from the Postal Service. One of the challenges we have in turning data into information that auditors and investigators can act on to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the Postal Service is that we're not the authoritative source of that data. If for the OIG, we're pulling that data from the Postal Service. And then other sources we pull from are places like the Social Security Administration or the Department of Labor. So and even vendors, credit card vendors. We pull information from all of these places in order to develop data models and tools that tell us where there were potential inefficiencies in the Postal Service or potential misconduct. So one of the challenges we have is integrating various sources of information. We do a lot of data cleanup. That doesn't mean that the data is bad. It just means that the data doesn't talk to each other. Like if one source of data has first name, last name, and their full names, and the other source of data has last name, first name, and then they'll use initials for the first name, it takes a lot of work to get those 2 things to marry up. Or when we look at a zip code tells us a lot about a region, about a demographic, or about a district office. But if we're trying to see about the efficiencies of district offices and we're getting the information through zip codes, we then have to connect zip codes to district offices. We often refer to this as datatorial work. It's like being a janitor within the data and cleaning it up to make sure that it can integrate efficiently so that we can actually do something with it to inform the decision makers.
I love that datatorial. Is that done hopefully automatically, or is it done manually? Because I think that's something John I know we'll talk to in a second too.
For us, the answer right now is both. There still has to be a huge amount of human involvement, because we found, and this is probably true across all of our agencies right now, that the people who own the data and are the technical subject matter experts of it, and they're collecting the data, they're not the business understanding or the business owners of the data. They don't understand how that data is necessarily going to be used to drive business decisions. And so our job in the datatorial work is to develop relationships with both the technical subject matter experts and the business owner experts so that we can almost serve as an interpreter and a bridge between them. How can we take the data that you're giving us and turn it into something that means something for the business owners of the data?
Interesting. Let's turn to Thomas Beach from PTO. Talk a little bit about your work with data. You guys, again, like your colleague from the census, like GSA, like USPS, data is your lifeblood.
Well, thank you, Jason. Actually, it's the founding part of the Constitution, the Progress Clause that created the Patent Office, which is in exchange for data dissemination, what your invention is, we grant you the right to exclude others. That is the value proposition that we have been in the business of for 240 plus years. Something we haven't done very well is made it accessible and easy to understand. Patent prosecution and trademark prosecution is a rather complex process, and it comes with a transition from digital or from paper to digital at some point in time, which the founding parts of our infrastructure were based on a paper-driven basis versus digital-based. And so for us, a real challenge in terms of operations is understanding the flow chart of our data through the input-output of our agency, while also understanding we have a legal obligation to have an authoritative copy of all of our patent applications in a TIFF file. So if you can imagine, that's not readily accessed as unstructured data. So for us, it's a huge lift to both bring in data from the applicants that provide responses to examiners during prosecution, as well as the data that's produced by our examiners within the office, and then dissemination, which is a key aspect of our agency, as I mentioned before. We look at ourselves as the leading indicator of innovation. What you see coming in our door is what is going to come to your table in a couple years. So we're really looking at ways of understanding how our data can play a bigger role in the ecosystem with other agencies, while also remaining pure with the roadmap development early on, that we decided that we were going to be the authoritative source of that data, and we spend a lot of time ensuring that aspect. That's not something we can readily offload because of the legal situations with the change of a term in a patent or claim. That's a part of a patent that would change the scope of what could be litigated. So to put that in grand perspective, we get about 600,000 applications a year. We have 8,500 examiners. We have 600,000 cases in inventory. Each patent issues about, on average, 15 claims. Those are the magical things at the end of the period of time of prosecution that you can litigate. That's 5 million claims we make a year. So we are readily looking at a startup program which got us into open data. We roadmap, we built, we listened to our user community to really understand what do they value about our data. We built a plan, like I said, we roadmapped it, and we're really transferring that into our big data program. We really look at the two of those two as being very much a handoff from one to another. We look at big data as a performance measurement for management, and that's how we can really internalize what we know, what we're doing well, and what we're not.
Let me turn to John. You just heard 4 different perspectives, but they all have very similar challenges. So talk a little bit, react to what you heard.
Yeah, so there are commonalities with all 4 of the agencies and all of our customers in government. MarkLogic is a new generation database platform that leads the industry. And what sets it apart from the older generations of database is that it completely reduces the amount of pre-work that you have to do in order to put data into the database. It reduces substantially the development of schemas, the data quality problems that we've already heard mentioned. And so what it does is it allows programs to develop their systems faster. It reduces their CapEx costs, their operational cost, and it also helps them to integrate data from various systems faster because they don't have to conform data to a rigid schema. And that's the primary value proposition of the generation that we're talking about in terms of data management.
When we talk about integration, because I think what each of the panelists talked about, and let me start with John, but the integration piece seems to be the most difficult. What are you seeing from your customers? What's some of the things that are, what are the challenges and how are they overcoming them from an integration perspective?
Well, they certainly want to go faster. As time goes by, there are more and more legacy systems. The operational costs of those systems gets higher and higher, and what it does is it eats into the ability to build new things. So you're spending more and more, a higher percentage of your budget on operations and less of it on the CapEx, the new systems that you want to build to transform the business. So what they're looking for is a faster, cheaper way to integrate data that includes less hardware, less services, less software, and a more elegant approach to that integration so that they can achieve those goals.
A couple of you on the panel were shaking their head. Naveen, you were shaking your head. Talk a little bit about the integration pieces John described as faster, better, cheaper.
GSA is an interesting organization, right? We have 3 business units within our organization that are largely separate, right? So we have the Federal Acquisition Service, the Public Building Service, and the Technology Transformation Service that sit within our organization, as well as, of course, our internal organizations. And what we're seeing is that there's value in crossing the data streams here, but those silos are extremely high. So anything that we can do to show that connecting pieces of data is actually a valuable thing to any of these folks, it becomes a light bulb going off for our business partners as we execute. And so getting faster, cheaper, better is always good on that front. What's interesting as well is from the data integration perspective, I think a lot of what we've been doing, and this is why I was emphasizing governance when we were first talking, is really sort of working with those data owners and those business owners to make sure that they understand what data integration means to them, number one, right, what value they're going to get from it, but also what their responsibilities are within that space as well, right? How do we really sort of describe, well, if you're going to integrate with X, then let's make sure that we're actually sort of, everybody understands what what you have in your data set, and how do we actually sort of maintain data quality and data stewardship lines going forward.
And that's a great point, and maybe we'll pull on that string in the next segment. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the panel discussion, Tearing Down Government Silos, the Impact of Data Integration, sponsored by MarkLogic on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.